Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, June 27, 2018. Just laying down a marker for the day. Nothing special about the fact that it's June 27, 2018. It just happens to be the case. Today also Wednesday, and that also good news. It comes right in the spot that Wednesday usually comes, after Tuesday and just before Thursday. So everything's normal. No need to protest anything. It's all going well. The sun rising in the east, setting in the west. Wednesday coming in between Tuesday and Thursday. No news here. Time to go high, I guess. The week hasn't gone low, but that's all right. We take the high road anyway, I guess, all the time. I'm not really sure why that's really relevant to anything, but it keeps coming up every once in a while. And lots of civil activity out there down by the Red Hen in Lexington. The civil brigades are out throwing what I think appears to be horse manure. It is simply described in the initial tweet that I saw as poop, but it appears to be horse manure. On closer inspection, I went down there myself and did some investigative reporting. And, it could be mule poop, I suppose. Anyway, so the Fox affiliates have spent a couple of days camped out in front of the Red Hen. You should know this. In Lexington, Virginia, that, of course, the restaurant which Sarah Sanders, the press secretary to Donald Trump, was asked to leave, and she left politely. Remember how polite she was? And she was polite because civility, you see. And, it was all about as polite as possible. We heard the description of how the owner quietly took her aside and didn't make a scene and had them leave, et cetera, et cetera. And so now, because civility, there are crowds outside, and there are crowds outside. Just one more time, I should be clear about this. There are crowds outside because the Fox affiliates began camping out outside of the restaurant, reporting, well, there's no protesters here. There's no crowd of journalists. There's nobody out here at all. It's just sort of another day, another normal day here at the Red Hen. Wink, wink, I guess, because all of a sudden, crowds did start appearing, and crowds of journalists started appearing, and protesters started appearing, not immediately, but then they began appearing, and now they're outside every day yelling, closing the restaurant, and throwing horse manure and screaming, "Make America Great Again," because of all the civility that we're seeing. And, of course, by the way, I have not yet seen the Washington Post editorial opining that, listen, everybody, tensions are running high, but throwing feces isn't going to solve anything. Who has ever been convinced by having poo flung at their restaurant? Really, honestly, I'm not seeing the admonishment. Maybe, I'm sure they would say, well, it goes without saying. But if it goes without saying, then there wouldn't be people throwing poo out there, of course. But here's where we are. And, all this after they give her a free cheese plate, too, which is really rather astounding. I mean, is that not the actual happening here? They gave her a free cheese plate on the house for her entire party, and then she left, and they didn't ask her to pay or anything like that. That's an accurate description of what happened. And now look what happens. They throw poo at you. It's unbelievable. I guess civility or Civility Street, I guess, only runs one way, is one way of putting it, I suppose. Thankfully, as I mentioned, it is Wednesday, and that means Greg Dworkin is here to get us on to things that are real news. And there really are some great stories, especially those coming out of exactly where he warned you on Monday you would find them come Wednesday morning, New York 14. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. That was actually pretty cool. We picked that up because it is a big story, and we'll talk about that a lot today.
Well, good call. There was a lot of excitement around it, and we really should have. We probably should have said it earlier, but
of course, the other one was a complete dud.
Oh well.
That was New York 11, where we thought that Mike Grimm was going to have a competitive race with incumbent Dan Donovan on the Republican side.
Yeah.
And what turned out to happen is that primary beat Michael Grimm like a little boy.
Oh, well, okay. Didn't tear
Which,
him
by
in
the
half.
way, is
That was
his
very
expression.
civil.
That's why I'm using it.
Yes.
Not that I, condone those sorts of things. But it turns out it was like a 2-1 victory,
Good.
and Grimm wasn't even close. And you know what? It turns
he's a
out that being
convict.
convicted and being a jerk maybe does matter, in terms of being a candidate.
That is good, because otherwise we would have to do the YOLO, LOL, nothing matters thing.
I suppose. But had Grimm won, it would have been a competitive race. As is, Dan Donovan has a pretty good chance of keeping that. It's only a PVI +3 in favor of Republicans. So in theory, it should be a close race. But in practice, I don't know. It's Staten Island.
Well, we'll start throwing poo and see how it goes.
Right. I saw somewhere that it was actually chicken poop. Well,
that makes more sense. I took a quick look at some pictures, and those are big chickens. So
it's the red hen. It's symbolic.
Yeah. Oh no, I thought that would make much more sense. It's just so difficult to gather and throw chicken poop, and that might have motivated them to use these larger pieces.
Then you might have other things that are going in. And on that topic, The Onion had a great infographic, which they entitled "Tips for Staying Civil While Debating Child Prisons."
Good. Thankfully, we need these things.
Right. Avoid unkind generalizations like equating the jailing of ethnic minorities with some malevolent form of fascism.
Yeah, everyone hates that.
Consider that we all have different perspectives stemming from things like age, ethnicity, or level of racism.
That will help.
Right? Recall that violently rejecting a tyrannical government goes against everything our forefathers believed in.
Yes, right. I'm glad they didn't write that down.
Find common ground by recognizing that some kids, especially the young ones and the babies, are huge a-holes.
Oh, yeah. Well, and tyrants. It does happen.
Right? And make sure that any protests are peaceful, silent, and completely out of sight of anybody who could actually affect government policy.
Yes. Don't give it up. All right.
And I think the most important of all,
I've got
every pressing social issue is solved through civil discourse if you ignore virtually all of human history.
Oh. Well, that will explain things.
Right. My favorite, what I was seeing, and I forget who actually put this up, but one of the dumber pundit comments of all time.
Oh, no.
Oh, it was David Gergen, who was on CNN.
Yes, you're right. I know
he said something along the lines of, if only we were polite and nice the way we were in the 60s, because we've seen nothing like this in our lifetimes.
Yeah, the Vietnam War protests were so civil.
Well, what immediately came to mind to me, being of that era, of course, is Kent State, where 4 people were shot by National Guard. Bernadette Dorn and the Weathermen blowing up things. The radical left bombing in those days, SDS and stuff like that. That was real.
Was it?
But, it goes down the memory hole.
Okay.
And it's used as an example of how people tend to, I use the term advisedly, whitewash history.
Yes.
Does anybody really learn about Reconstruction and what actually happened during that era?
No.
So it's the Confederate statues, and what do they mean, and why were they put up? No, it wasn't to celebrate Southern heritage. It was celebrated Jim Crow, and that's why they were put up.
Well, that's the time period that they went up.
No, I accept that people say now. Well, that may have been then, but this is what it means to me now. That's fine. That's a debate.
Okay, you're wrong.
But let's not pretend that somehow that was always the case, and that, really the 1960s were about Kumbaya. That's where that era song came from, and nothing else happened. Not Chicago 68. There was no conflict. It's really kind of a bizarre way to look at history.
It is a weird way, especially if you're a pundit and like a dean sort of pundit and an old guy.
You're supposed to know these things, right?
Yeah, so that's why we have you.
I'll give you one last one to think about, because this will help you put it all in perspective. Give your political opponents the benefit of the doubt by letting this play out for 20 years and seeing if it gets any better on its own.
All right, sure. It's a good plan.
Meanwhile, let's give you some lightning round things, just because I don't think we'll get to all of them, but maybe you want to in depth later. GOP lawmaker won't apologize for retweeting prominent British neo-Nazi. Guess who that is?
Steve King.
King isn't apologizing for retweeting a prominent far-right British activist who described himself as a Nazi sympathizer. He said he didn't know, but it doesn't matter because it's a sentiment. Right?
Okay.
Satellite image suggests North Korea is not too keen on denuclearizing. After all, if anything, they're building up their nuclear reactors. As Rick Wilson points out, it's as if, and ride with me, The Nobel Committee should not be in any kind of hurry.
Yes.
Right?
No, I think they should take their time and delay it a couple of years.
Other notable things in The More Things Change, Things Don't Change. This is Zach Petkanis. He was the one talking when Corey Lewandowski said womp womp when he was describing.
What's his name?
Zach Petkanis.
Okay, thank you.
Petkanis.
I should
Dem
track
strategist.
these things. Cool, got it.
Right. He had a tweet today. Gas, prescription, and premium costs, that is to say healthcare premium costs, are rising despite the tax breaks the GOP gave these companies. Thousands of children are still separated from their parents. But the Republican House of Representatives is holding a hearing today on, wait for it,
Benghazi?
Hillary's email.
Oh, okay, close. Same thing.
Because, it's that important.
Right.
So let's talk about what did happen. Yeah, we mentioned on Monday that one of the things to keep an eye on was the primaries that were coming. And New York 14 was an incredible upset. In many ways, people are looking at this as an Eric Cantor type situation, which I think is true in a lot of ways. Joe Crowley.
Yeah, okay.
Not Aleister Crowley. Joe Crowley.
Oh, that's better.
Was not exactly a household name, but he was in leadership. I think he was fourth in line behind Steny Hoyer and somebody else, Clyburn, James Clyburn.
Yes,
so
right.
Number 4. And Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn, I think, average about 75 years old.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. Crowley a little younger, yeah, right.
He was a little younger, and he was seen as the younger generation coming up.
He was the guy who was there.
He had a district which straddled the Whitestone Bridge, so a little bit in Queens, a little bit in the Bronx. Statistics I saw flash by on Twitter, haven't fact-checked them, said that the district was something like 50% Latinx and maybe 70% non-white. So he was an interesting person to represent that district. Yet, at the same time, he was head of the Queens Democratic Committee, so they used to call him the King of Queens. And he got knocked out by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was 28, a Democratic socialist, and who ran on a platform of the rent's too high, Medicare for all, and abolish ICE.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the platform. And I actually watched last night as the returns were coming in. I watched a debate she had with Crowley that was broadcast on New York One. She was very articulate, very prepared. She had been working for this for a while. She had one of those terrific videos. We talked about MJ Hager and the Doors video that was out, introducing MJ Hager to the Texas group. We talked about Jason Kandor and his a couple of years ago assembling a rifle blindfolded in his Missouri race, which he ultimately wound up losing, but was a great video. Amy McGrath in Kentucky had a terrific video, and so did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so the Simon Rosenberg has a really nice and interesting tweet storm here. Some thoughts on Ocasio 2018's impressive win last night. First, Democrats need to be talking more about vast changes in media campaigns underway right now. Trump was outspent but won. Crowley spent millions for 12,000 votes. Social age favors compelling candidates. The biggest change is explosion of mobile video. Video now is with us all the time. You don't need a TV to bring it up. You watch it on your iPhone or smartphone. Always on, video-heavy media allows compelling candidates like Ocasio 2018, which is their Twitter handle, to tell their story in ways 30-second spots never could.
Yes.
Think about how Amy McGrath burst on the scene, or the great new video we just saw from MJ Hager this week. These long-form videos weren't possible in the age of 30-second spots.
Right. Perfect.
New social viral always on media is far more candidate-centric, and performance narrative authenticity of candidates just matters more now. Trump starts with his words on Twitter every day, or follow Beto O'Rourke. He's doing it right. He's always on Twitter talking about this stuff. Or watch the video from Mikey Sherrill. Amazing, powerful stuff. Navy Academy graduate, Navy pilot, former federal prosecutor, running for Congress to fight back against Donald Trump. And it's just not these cookie-cutter ads that everybody was, otherwise doing. where you didn't even have to look at it. You knew it was boring.
Yes.
She's running New Jersey 11, by the way. And, it'll just be interesting to follow a lot of this stuff to see how well some of these candidates do. I have a feeling that, older guys like Joe Crowley, I don't even know if he watches any of this stuff. I don't know if he was even aware there was this great stuff out there.
Joe Crowley is aware of all internet traditions.
Yeah, because...
John McCain was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're both in Congress or something.
Right. They're both in Congress, so they know everything.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, I read in passing somewhere, and I didn't investigate it and do something smart like find out what was the name, but I read, and I'm not certain about her video, Alexandria's video, but I understood that the others that you had mentioned were all produced by the same person or people. And I said, wow, that's something I should... Oh, the tweet is gone. I should click on that and find out who is that person. Had you seen something to that effect?
It may be true, but
that would be like an important person to identify.
It would be.
But if any of you saw that story...
It would be like the Rising Joe Trippi in an earlier age where, he makes these really interesting ads.
Right. And a huge point in the article, as you pointed out. Every time, what used to happen, you'd show a video like that, and the establishment and, people who generally had seen a lot of elections in their time would say, that is a fantastic video. It will never air. It is 2.5 minutes long. You can't air that anywhere. And now, as they point out, you don't need to air it. And it used to be, you get free video exposure on YouTube. People see it. But now, with mobile technology and the explosive growth of social media, many, many, many more people and influencers and activists in the district do actually see it. It's not just, people who read my article about the interesting long-form ad will go and see it. It's a huge thing now. It's for real.
Well, so she's a compelling candidate, and she fits her district.
Yes.
And she is a Democratic socialist.
That too.
She was an ex-Bernie organizer, but Bernie didn't endorse her as far as I know.
Oh. Well,
it matters not in that sense. What matters is that you had a good young candidate running against somebody who was complacent and didn't really show up to a lot of the debates, or at least one debate. I know I saw another one where he did show, just didn't, have the same compelling presence that she did. So she was a better candidate, and she won, and that's the deal. But of course, she's part of the rising number of Democratic women who are running and winning. And really, it's all about having compelling candidates. So let's look at this in a larger sense, not just New York 14. Of course, I find it fascinating because I'm a native New Yorker. But here's Charlie Cook writing in National Journal, paywalled, unfortunately. But what he says is Trump's risky bet on his base. This comes in the Pundit Roundup today. That's where you can find all this stuff. Excellent. The president's decided to double down on the aggressive strategy that worked for him in 2016, but it may not work for the rest of the GOP. And among other things, including talking about the enthusiasm that the Democrats are seeing. That's one of the things you saw in New York 14.
Yeah. I forgot we were going to go with this one.
There you go. Sorry. One way of looking at the Republican Party today, Cook writes, is to think of thirds. 1/3 absolutely positively in love with Trump, pretty much everything he says and does. Uh-huh. And those are the people who are flinging chicken poo at the red hen.
Yes.
The next third,
as though she didn't know where to find
mostly
any.
Agrees with him, wincing here or there, but remaining fundamentally with him. This is the group of people who still vote for him and probably would vote for him in 2020 and generally always vote for Republicans, and they don't like it, but that's what they do. Now, you can talk to them, you can have a civil discussion with them, but you're unlikely to persuade any of them. Mm-hmm. But then there's the other third.
Oh.
Okay? And the final third has a lot of issues with him and is split. Some members are still hanging with him with reservations, and the others are off the reservation. Again, remember that phrase, off the reservation. Apologies to Meteor Blades. It's just one of those things that older people say.
Is that in the...
That's in there.
All right, good.
With reservations while others are off the reservation. He's playing with that reservation thing. Dangerous. But, I'm pointing out, we all have to be careful about unlearning things that we used to say. This is the third that Republicans have to worry about staying home in November. They're less in that small-town rural working-class coalition and more like the middle-class to upscale suburban Republicans who used to be the dominant faction in the party. So half of a third, a sixth of the party
I was told there would be no
has already left, and the other 1/6 is persuadable. And when I talk about persuading ex-Trump voters, not necessarily Trump supporters, I'm not talking about the first third who are rabid. Leave them alone. Don't even touch them. They have cooties. Use a 20-foot pole. And the second third you can engage with, but only at your amusement. Don't spend a lot of time on them because they're really not going to change that much. Maybe you'll pick off one. But that last third, there's enough voters in there to matter. And I'll give you some evidence of that. Charlie Cook talks about the June 1 to 4 NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. That's June 1st to June 4th. That did not get nearly enough attention on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being those with a very high interest in the upcoming midterm elections. 63% of Democrats pegged themselves as either a 9 or a 10, compared to just 47% of Republicans and 44% of independents. Another is that while Democrats had a 10-point lead on the generic congressional ballot test, respondents in currently Democratic-held districts gave Democrats a 22-point lead.
I like it.
While those in Republican-held districts gave the GOP a 1-point lead.
Oh. Yeah. Good.
Okay. So the Democrats are really amped. And what this means is Democrats don't need to worry about holding on to their own districts. A lot of Republican members who may not be worried today should be. They're going to be the Joe Crowleys. They're going to not see it coming, even though their leadership keeps telling them it's coming, you have to be really careful. And they're the ones that might be surprised.
Yeah.
So, again, as another example of that, this is from NBC News this morning, because they had a series of battleground state polls yesterday. Kristen Sinema beating everybody in Arizona, for example, by 10 points, except Arpaio, where she was beating him by 25.
Oh, you mean he's wildly
Sherrod
popular.
Brown in Ohio winning by 13. And Bill Nelson in Florida winning by 4. That's on top of Tim Kaine in a different poll from Quinnipiac winning Virginia by 18, and Barbara Comstock in Virginia 10 losing by 10 points. She's the incumbent Republican. Yes. Okay, so in this NBC News write-up by Carrie Dan this morning, battleground state polls find more voters prefer Congress as a check on Trump. Only about a third of voters in Arizona, Florida, and Ohio. And let me point out, these are swing states.
Oh,
only a third of voters say Trump deserves to be reelected.
Okay.
That is a big deal, because if that's the mindset you're taking into the November elections, Trump is not helping you.
Trump is never going to help you.
Well, Trump is never going to help you, but you as a voter, the whole deal is like if the president's approval is high, then that's going to help his party in the midterms, even though the other party, the out party of the president, generally gains in midterms, and Trump's popularity is not necessarily going to help him. I've seen a couple of strategists and other pretty wise people point out, what's really happening here is that the generic ballot, which is around 6 right now, 6.5 in favor of the Democrats, may be underplaying the Democratic wave. Because it's not necessarily picking up the higher numbers that might be in these swing states.
I see.
As opposed to, but in Mississippi, Trump has big numbers, and so it averages out, and it's only 6. Well, it's the swing states that matter. It's the Republican suburbs that matter. And that's why these polls, looking at places like where Barbara Comstock is currently in Congress really, really matters. Yes. So, for example, in that Monmouth poll, a couple of things about that. It had more than just Comstock losing by 10. What do Virginia 10 voters want to control Congress? Who do they want? Democrats 42, Republicans 34. This is a swing district with a Republican congressman. And they want Democrats 42-34. The Democratic Party split in favorability, 34-38. Republican Party's 26-46.
Okay.
Very important to cast House vote as show of Trump support or opposition. For supporters, it's very important to cast a House vote. 58% say it's very important. And for opponents, 70%.
Oh, huh. Okay. Yes.
Okay. I mean, the point is the opposition is really amped up. Now, that SCOTUS decision yesterday is not going to change that.
No.
And neither is what's going on with the border in terms of putting kids in baby jails.
Right.
In this Virginia CD10 district, which is a Republican district at the current time, 42% approve of real Donald Trump. That's his Twitter handle.
I see.
24% strongly, and 53% disapprove, 47% strongly. So that's really the point here. The enthusiasm and the
Yes.
I really dislike and I really don't support and I really strongly disapprove is generally in many cases like this one, in this Republican district, the strongly disapprove is twice the strongly approve. That is a pretty consistent finding these days. So November's actually looking pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I can say with respect to this particular district, I mean, it probably does matter that it's also, I mean, it's a relatively close-in D.C. suburban district.
It's the suburban district that the Democrats need.
As suburban districts in D.C. go, it's not that close in. But, I mean, it's in the Washington, D.C. greater metropolitan area, which means that even the Republicans there are people who generally are like, hey, this isn't normal. It doesn't work this way. I'm in government or government contracting or something quite like it, and I've seen how this government is supposed to work up close and personal, and this isn't it. This is weird. I don't like this. It makes me uncomfortable. So it may not be the case everywhere, of course, but then whatever you have to do to keep your opioid abuse low, I guess we'll do it. It's amazing. Okay, well, we'll be right back with still more results and probably some other information and news as well on the other side of our 2-minute break. Thanks, Greg. Hang on just a moment, everyone. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. What the hell do we call this show again? Welcome back to the Netroots Kagro Show Morning in Netroots Radio. Dorkin guy is here.
Still
I've lost track of all the things that we do on this show. Okay, great. Whatever. We're here. And
well, that's good. At least one of us.
Sure, right. Why not? It should be somebody else's show, really, is what I'm saying at this point. Okay, so we left off in the middle of a Raft O polling. And
yeah, so Bill Kristol was picking up on this battleground polling from Marist NBC, looking at Arizona, Florida, and Ohio. And he says, this is interesting, he says. Trump's approval or disapproval isn't terrible. In Arizona, it's 41-47. In Florida, it's 45-46. In Ohio, it's 42-49. But it deserves to be re-election is terrible. 35% deserves to be a re-election in Arizona, 37% in Florida, and 34% in Ohio. And he writes, a key slice of voters approve, in scare quotes, as it should be, approve of Trump, but don't want to vote for him in 2020.
Okay.
These are swing states.
Sort of.
You know, it's going to be even worse in blue states.
Yeah. Well, I hope it is. But I'm glad that they at least say, well, okay, I don't think he should be elected. I guess it's harmless almost by comparison to say, all right, well, I approve of him, but I don't think he should be president. Okay.
Right.
Fine. But,
so
I disapprove and don't think so would be better.
Yeah. So here's a piece by Josh Kraushaar, the 5 most compelling House showdowns, races to watch. And he's got some interesting ones here.
Races
Kentucky,
to watch.
6. This is Representative Andy Barr versus Amy McGrath, the Democrat.
Yes.
The ultimate bellwether. Early polling shows McGrath, a former Marine pilot, actually leading Barr in a district where President Trump is still widely popular. Again, popularity doesn't mean reelect. But Republicans are confident that once they nationalize the race, the numbers will tighten. Well, they can tighten as long as she's ahead. There's a rural-urban divide in this seat that Republicans will try to exploit. The state's Democratic base is Lexington, and that's 40% of the district, but GOP-friendly rural surroundings make up a majority. Of course, she's a great candidate for that district.
Okay, so, that would be a good thing.
A McGrath victory. The other thing he points out, a useful little factoid here, on Election Day, Kentucky polls will be the first to close in the country, and if McGrath scores an early upset, it'll be an encouraging sign for the Democrats' wave, basically, is what he says.
All right. Good for your watch parties.
Yeah. Pennsylvania 17, this is Representative Keith Rothfuss versus Representative Connor Lamb, who just won a district, but then, of course, redistricting put him in a different place.
Yeah.
It's not often you get a House race featuring two congressmen facing each other, but the new map in Pennsylvania forced rising Democratic star Lamb to challenge Rothfuss in a district that's evenly divided between Trump and Clinton voters. In a sign of the contest's importance, Vice President Mike Pence flew into Pittsburgh last week for a fundraiser with the embattled GOP congressman.
Yeah,
Trump's protectionist push was designed in part to win over steel workers, but medical and fracking jobs are bigger drivers of the region's economy than steel. Lamb managed to win in a more conservative district than this, despite the president's tariff threats. Another Democratic victory would underscore the political futility of opposing free trade. That's Kraushaar's free trader.
Yeah.
Inner self coming out there. Number 3, Texas 32. This is Pete Sessions versus Colin Allred.
All right.
As my colleague Ron Brownstein would put it, this race will test whether the coalition of the ascendant is prevailing in the age of Trump or the forces of restoration will remain in this rapidly diversifying suburban Dallas district, upscale district, and we'll see what happens. But if the district doesn't stay red, it'll demonstrate the booming economy isn't enough to protect Republicans.
Okay.
Number 4, California 45. That was one of the ones that we were following during the big California jungle primary day.
Oh, yes.
Mimi Walters, Republican, versus Katie Porter. Katie Porter is the one who's an Elizabeth Warren acolyte. Democrats are growing increasingly confident that voters will be receptive to liberal messaging on health care, with numerous candidates running on the vague-sounding Medicare for All message. Remember, this is conservative Josh Kraushaar who's writing this.
Yes.
Porter has gone even further, supporting a single-payer government-run system.
All right.
Okay, she's an acolyte of Senator Elizabeth Warren, that term again, and isn't afraid to tout progressive policy prescriptions. Well, why should anybody be afraid to tout progressive policy prescriptions?
It's not that scary.
Not long ago, it would have been remarkable to hear a Democrat calling for socialized medicine in Orange County, the one-time conservative heartland of California. But there it is.
Okay. Yikes.
Okay. Number 5, California 25. This is not one we concentrated on a lot. Steve Knight, Republican, versus Katie Hill, Democrat. At 30, Hill is one of the youngest and most intriguing frontline congressional nominees in the country, director of the largest homelessness nonprofit in the state, and she's a moderate. She knows how to shoot a gun. She's a small farm owner. This is the Democrat. But she offers a millennial vibe. She's openly bisexual, is an outspoken activist in LGBT issues. It's probably the first time you'll ever hear a candidate talk about their resting bitch face in a documentary. And because she let Vice News in following her around.
I see.
This is shaping up to be a banner year for both women and political outsiders, but Hill still needs to do traditional electioneering, like turning out normally disengaged Hispanic voters and convincing older voters she's ready. Regardless of the outcome, her campaign will be fun to watch.
Yes. She shoots her own avocados
in New York 14, the candidate who's only 29 convinced the voters she's ready. And a lot of the people that I just listed for you, 3 out of 5 of these most intriguing races are women. And, there's a lot going on here in terms of demographics as well. So I'm going to turn to Ron Brownstein here, who's the demographic reporter. Okay. Benji Sarlin points out that the New York 14 race is wild enough on its own, but bigger trend keeps showing up in every state. Democratic women running in large numbers and knocking out male challengers all over the place. It feels hard to believe this won't carry into the general election.
I don't believe it won't.
Ron Brownstein adds, one big question for Democrats in these Senate polls, the ones that we were telling you from Marist than from Quinnipiac. The young people alienated from Trump turn out. In Arizona, the Marist poll shows Dems only +7 among voters 18 to 29, +34 in Florida, +40 in Ohio.
Oh.
And in Virginia, Dems lead by 46. A reminder of what Trump's stamp could cost the GOP with the next generation. And these numbers are also a reminder of why Democrats face such an urgent need for generational transition in their geriatric national leadership. A party whose fate increasingly turns on younger turnout, they may want more leaders born after World War II and the Korean War.
Well, the Korean War gets a pass thanks to the president.
But young people were willing to vote for Bernie. They like Joe Biden. I mean, it's not all about age.
That is
it's
absolutely
kind of interesting,
true.
But really, it's all about the candidates.
Yeah, and I don't think. By the way, if you rode a wave to a Democratic House, I don't know that it would be viewed as such a horrible thing, especially if you rode in on a wave of women to install a woman speaker again, though she's older. But she'll be communicating with these younger women who make it to Congress, and it may just be the case that the women that we send to Congress say, you know what, actually, I really do think that it's extraordinarily important to keep
the Parkland kids are not saying vote them out, but only if you're over 30.
Well, that is true.
They're just saying vote them out. They're voting Democrat. They're not voting Democrat based on age. Dave Weigel says, I feel like any Dems just had their Eric Cantor moment has to factor in how the Republicans crushed the 2014 elections a few months after Cantor lost. So the point is that the wave that kicked Crowley out, again, might quite be real.
It might. And I think of a very different type. Like the wave that kicked Eric Cantor out wasn't a wave that had any real substantive policy positions behind it. It was just, we hate whatever's in our way. Versus, I noticed when they talked to Acacio after her election, I saw that clip. She's shocked to see the numbers.
When she
very
won,
excited.
It was a beautiful clip.
And she still is like, well, oh my God, she's still articulate and spoke about issues and snuck it in there. And that reminds us of the off-year election results that we watched here in Virginia, and asking Danica Rome questions about, well, how about what does it feel like to be the first? Traffic. That's actually what we're into over here.
Yeah, local issues and
but having your head on your shoulders and not just squawking like Dave Bratt did about about his having decapitated the establishment.
No, she wasn't going for a scalp.
Right. So I thought that was well handled. And by the way, her district,
and Crowley was very gracious in the tweet. He played a song for her and then just tweeted, actually I have the tweet here somewhere. But it was very good. It was, I want to congratulate Acacio 2018. I look forward to supporting her and all Democrats this November. The Trump administration is a threat to everything we stand for here in the Queens and the Bronx. And if we don't win back the House this November, we'll lose the nation we love. That's a pretty nice tweet.
I think so. Well done. And it's a strongly Democratic district, and so it's a pretty good chance that with competent and electioneering, she wins it. I'm wondering whether
she'll win it. This is she's going to be the youngest.
Well, I wanted to risk
person.
something by saying I would that the California candidate that you were just telling us about out in which district was it? It wasn't 45. It was the next one you moved on to, but I'm wondering, she too was about 30
25,
years.
Katie Hill.
30. And that being a very different district, and in particular, the necessity of motivating the Latinx voters there, might not be a bad move to say, you're in relatively good shape back here in New York 14, Alexandria. How about a visit to your next youngest cohort over here in California?
Right, but maybe not West Virginia. West Virginia may not be the place to go to try to stump up Democratic support.
If she goes and barnstorms the country, she puts her own race in jeopardy. There are some select places where I think that could make it. Just occurred to me, and I'm a huge, highly paid Democratic consultant, and everyone listens to me. So
more Ron Brownstein. One big question for Democrats. Now we talked about that in terms of the youth, but let's talk about women. Striking convergence in new Marist poll and Quinnipiac poll. Senate surveys that underscore Trump's impact on 2018. In Arizona, Ohio, and Virginia, the Democrats split men evenly with Republicans.
Okay.
And in Florida, Democrats are -8 with men.
All right. They're very old.
But with women.
Yes.
The Democrats are +14 in Florida, +20 in Arizona, +26 in Ohio, and +34 in Virginia.
They're all young. I don't know what happened to this old women there. What's going on?
Right, looking at it another way, Democrats are running 11 points better among women than men in Arizona and Florida, 13 points in Ohio, and 17 points in Virginia. While the gender gap has often been overrated, it looks like a big force in 2018, along with the education divide among whites.
Okay.
So the gender gap is so big, you made Ron Brownstein give up on just looking at non-college whites.
Oh.
That's how big it is.
That is a big deal. You have to listen to the show a lot to know. No, you don't.
That's Brownstein's
You just said
thing.
it.
He identified it early, and he goes back to it all the time. Of course, he's right to do so.
Right.
But it's a big deal.
Well, okay. And these are our, what are they? Soccer grandmothers. Who's?
I suppose.
I don't know.
Now,
Florida, yes.
I don't have that much more on the show in terms of time. There's a lot to talk about. The travel ban, maybe I'll leave that for Joan if she's coming, or for you later, or maybe even Armando if he can weigh in on it. Awful decision. But one thing I do want to talk about is this really interesting article that just showed up this morning in the Monkey Cage blog. The news media usually show immigrants as dangerous criminals. That's changed for now, at least. And it's a political science study of images and what effect they have. And the author writes, Emily Ferris and I were having a back and forth on Twitter this morning because she posted this. And I said, this is great, thanks. It's just in time for the pundit roundup. And she wrote back and said, I'm going to have on my CV, I've now been published at Daily Kos. And I said, well, great. Well, it's been crowd reviewed, so that's important.
Yeah.
And she said, actually on my tenure track bio, I noted that I had been published from places from Breitbart to, some other place. She said, now I can say I've been published from Breitbart to Daily Kos.
That's true, a wider range.
Do it. Anyway, she writes, the news media usually show immigrants as dangerous criminals. That's changed for now, at least. Among nearly all racial and ethnic groups, male immigrants were pictured more often than female. The gap was largest among images of Latino immigrants, which showed only 21.5% women, although in fact 49% of Latino immigrants were women as of 2010. Our findings are similar to that of Martin Gilens and Bas W. Van Doorn, political scientists whose research finds that news media are far more likely to portray poor people as black than white. Despite the fact that there are more poor whites, we find the media typically overrepresents Latino men in comparison to their presence in the general immigrant population. In other words,
yes,
the current wave of images of women and children at the border is unique. And she points out, as I pointed out, the media is a sucker for images. And it's a sucker for images over substance.
Yes.
Although the one place that you don't get that advantage, of course, is radio. So when you listen to NPR, you don't get to see the images. You do get to hear the sounds, though, so you hear the babies crying, which is perfect for radio.
That's a thing, yes.
Even Trump noted, she goes on to write, discomfort with the, quote, sight or feeling of families being separated, unquote. As Trump's positions change, the news media may want to show women and children more often if it wants to more accurately portray immigration. And by the way, I would add, and if you want to change public opinion.
Yes. Problem
it's one thing to talk about MS-13. We talked about that on the show on Monday. If you're showing 17-year-old boys, and it's another thing if you're showing babies.
Yes.
Those are MS-1, right? And then you graduate to MS-2 and then MS-3.
It's a grade level. I get you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that may be why we don't get to see them and why they hide them.
That is why when you get the images from them, you can't go in here. We'll give you pictures.
Right.
The pictures they give you are of males, usually older males.
Yeah, and not even accurate at that. Okay. By the way, do we still not know really for serious where the girls are?
We have an idea, but again, media, the Red Cross, and congressional people are not being allowed in. So yeah, it's still the major story. Of course, we got to talk about SCOTUS being the major story for a couple of days, but this is an ongoing thing. And in fact, ACLU won a case in California just overnight, which says that they have to reunite the kids.
Yes, right. I did see that in passing, and I didn't get to grab that story, but true. 30 days, I think.
I think 14 days for the toddlers and 30 days for the older kids. I'm just going to end with, do you have the pundit roundup up that I have
I do. Can I find it on my screen? Yeah, here we go. Yep.
Okay, just going to talk about the graphic I made.
Okay.
I took the headlines from the New York Times. I just want to read them to you because it kind of puts in perspective in New York what the big deal was.
Okay.
And the whole front page of the New York Times is Ocasio-Cortez upsets a top House Democrat. Crowley's defeat in New York race may have wide impact. Who is Ocasio-Cortez, a Democratic giant slayer? The lessons of a stunning New York primary. What Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory means. These are the headlines.
Yes.
Right? And then the SCOTUS decision is below the fold. But the tabloids had different approaches. The Daily News, which is anti-Trump, had a cartoon on their front page, Lady Killers. They had Blind Justice with labeled SCOTUS stabbing the Statue of Liberty in the back.
Yeah.
Supreme shameful hatchet job on liberty upholds Trump's Muslim ban. The New York Post, which is conservative and generally pro-Trump, had Ocasio-Cortez on the picture with the giant blaring headline, Red Alert.
Because of the color of her
you love
lipstick.
the New York tabloids. It's just so much fun to read.
Yes.
I mean, not the stories, just the covers.
Crazy, I see, and that was.
But they're warning you that a socialist is now going to represent, right?
Look out!
As if Bernie hasn't been representing Vermont for like all these years.
Yes, and red.
Oh my God! There's going to be a socialist in Congress. What do we do?
I don't know. They don't seem concerned about Russia, so I say we cast off all the old ideas. If they happen to be the better
candidate, is what you do.
Yeah, and okay. So that's the New York Post for you. Right.
So anyway, that's just the state of where things are as of today. Lots of turmoil and upsetness in general from the SCOTUS decisions yesterday. Got a nice piece here from Max Boot. The Supreme Court joins congressional Republicans as the see no evil doctrine in action. We also have the immigration bill coming up today, which I think is probably going to fail. This is a piece from Politico. A last-minute effort to salvage a House GOP immigration bill appeared to flounder Tuesday amid unyielding opposition from the far right.
What? No way.
Desperate to flip conservative votes, centrist House Republicans offered to add a controversial provision requiring use of E-Verify, which mandates all companies certify the legal status of their workers, but it doesn't look like that'll be enough. Basically, what happens here is that the conservatives want to show the world that the Goodlatte conservative bill, which they talked moderates into supporting in order to get their own version, the moderate version there.
Yeah.
Then the conservatives pull the support from the moderate bill, and then they tell the world, you see, there's much more sentiment for conservative bills than there is for moderate bills. This moderate bill got no votes at all. Oh. That's the one that could actually pass the House if they opened it up because Democrats would vote with it.
I see.
But the game is to say, look, it has no support at all. You got to go even more hard right if you want to get anything done. And that's a tactic with Republicans that would work because they're Republicans and they're stupid. They're not stupid in the sense of, they get to win, but they're stupid in the sense of, I'm going to convince somebody that this is really what's going on. Fact of the matter is that a more moderate, which neither of these bills are, but a more moderate bill would pass the House if it were open, and that was the whole point of the discharge petition. It didn't work.
Right.
Because Ryan tactically said, you know what, let's do it my way. I promise you a vote, and when the vote comes, we'll pull all the conservative votes for it, but I promised you a vote.
Right.
Now you're going to look like idiots, but I promised you a vote. And that's what they did. And I'm not saying they're dumb because it was a bad tactic. It was a brilliant tactic. I'm saying it's dumb because if you're really trying to convince people that only hardline things can pass, well, the hardline thing couldn't pass. And no, that's not really the situation if you look at the entire Congress as a whole. But you know what? We get a chance to change a lot of that in November, and that was the subject of most of my talk today. So This is Greg Gorkin signing off. David will, you got an hour left, right? Something like that?
Sure. I'll call my kids in and they'll do the show.
Do something. Talk about something.
I've got a few
Just one or two things that came up that you can talk about.
Yeah. Some follow-ups, but I know you have to go to work, so we'll talk about you.
Yeah,
I mean your stories after you go.
But I'll be back tomorrow.
So that means we're repeat players in this game, and we have to be civil.
We'll do it again.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Take care, you jerk, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. By the way, before we get off of that immediate last subject, I will note for the record what many people on Twitter were saying this morning about that one of the New York Times headlines that's out there. Or is it a subheader? Or is it just a smaller headline because it's a sidebar story? The who is OcasioCortez story. Who is OcasioCortez? Bad start. A Democratic giant slayer. Okay, well, that's sort of like a good thing to say about her. And as people were pointing out, well, they weren't pointing it out quite this way. They were a little more angry about it, and rightfully so. But how could the New York Times have been expected to know anything about a person running for Congress in New York? I mean, it's far away. You got to travel. You have to, they're interviewing people. They're making sure that there are people on the ground to talk to people in diners and bars and small backwater, like intentionally backwater districts out in what we like to say. Even you could even sense it in the New York Times writing, even as they were saying, well, we're paying attention to the forgotten men and women of America. And then they made such a big deal out of it being a backwater that they were, flyover country backwater dive bar that they were talking to people in. But we care. We really do care, don't you? Is on the back of their jackets. That's how you know that they care. And they're going out interviewing all these guys and making sure that they got those opinions 19, 20, 21 times every 2 days. You got another one of these stories. And they have been unable they've left themselves in the position at the end of the primary that they can't simply rest on what they've done in terms of minimum basic coverage of a congressional race right there in New York City and say, we know who OcasioCortez is, and so do you, because we've been talking about her as much of a long shot as we might have considered her to be. It was a big story here in New York, but apparently not. And, of course, it's also kind of telling, I guess, that they would... it's not an offensive headline all by itself, not glaringly offensive. You have to do a little bit of an analysis to figure out what's offensive about it. But I guess once you catch on to the scent, it's hard to shake it that, who is this mystery person? I don't know. A majority of the majority party in this district right here in your town knows who she is. And will pick up the newspaper and say, what do you mean, who is she? It's the person I just voted for yesterday. That's who it is. Are you kidding me? And but this isn't written for them. It's written for, I guess, probably Crowley voters who ignored her entirely and, may or may not be relieved to read and it's something about who she is. And for people in the other districts, I guess the more uptown districts of and I don't know that it's strictly speaking actually geographically uptown, but in the metaphorical sense, uptown. Readers elsewhere in New York City. Yes, who is this person? These would be the people who, I guess, in older films set in New York City spoke with a strange, almost English accent that is, I think, more or less completely gone from the New York metropolitan area at this point. But I find that rather surprising. Well, who is this person? I don't know. How did she manage to win if nobody knows who they are? Who do you think you're talking to, New York Times? New York Times. So it's a little upsetting, but I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. I think it's been adequately, the surprise, let's say, has been adequately expressed elsewhere by others closer to the race. And so that's a good thing. What was the other thing? And now I've distracted myself about the other direction in which I was going to go based on what Greg exited with. But, it'll probably occur to us in sweeping down through the stories again. Yes, the discharge petition. Maybe this is something we can talk about a little bit with Joan, and I'll try and catch up on what happened. I don't know exactly what happened to the petition itself, and I noticed that when Greg was explaining how Ryan and the Republican leadership kind of hoodwinked the last couple of Republican moderates who might otherwise have signed the discharge petition to withhold their signatures in exchange for a promised vote, which they then rigged to lose. And that's the way these things usually come out, and discharge petitions usually don't work. I don't even know whether there is a mechanism for withdrawing a discharge petition once it's initiated. So I guess it's still there. So there's still, I suppose, some danger that moderate Republicans, if they are truly moderate in any serious sense, who now feel screwed over, might say, fine, well then I'll go back to the desk and sign the discharge petition, and all of your machinations fall apart as we force a vote on the bill we wanted and only the bill we wanted. Although, I'm not certain that they can't still engineer a way around that through the Rules Committee, and that's probably what they would end up doing. But I don't know why they wouldn't just march right back to the desk in the front of in the well of the House and just sign that petition now. Although, I guess with the summer recess fast approaching, it's possible that they might be able to delay things such that the scheduling of the actual vote that the petition would ordinarily deliver could come with the August recess in the way if you really drag things out and perhaps drain some of the momentum. Although it could have the opposite effect and could only help build momentum for the bill as people who support it go back to their districts and say so and raise support for it among the public out in those same hinterlands where all the New York Times journalists are hiding and not paying attention to their own backyard, I guess. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what we can put together for our second hour, and hopefully we'll cross our fingers everything looks good. That is to say, no obvious signs that Joan is too busy, though today would be one of those days where you could imagine things being a little bit busy on the front page. This is something. I don't know what to make of this. Not too much, I guess, but I'll say this. It's not a particularly good look right now, although, there's still a lot of tensions and a lot of steam to be vented over the various races, including OcasioCortez's victory. We just mentioned, I guess, the highlights of the outcome of that race are the ones where Joe Crowley is defeated but is quite gracious in his defeat, although who knows what was privately said. But for instance, okay, here's what I'm looking at the moment. Kirsten Gillibrand, as you should be expected to do as the incumbent Democratic senator from New York, tweets out, "Congratulations to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for running an impressive race in New York 14 and making history." And, that's what you have to do, right? You want to keep unity. You want to keep some goodwill, good feelings together. By all accounts, we will be seeing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Congress representing New York and having to work with the delegation, including Kirsten Gillibrand, come January of next year. And when I say, okay, well, maybe not a good look going on here, it won't surprise many of you. Others of you will say, hey, unfair picking on him. But Glenn Greenwald had this to say to Kirsten Gillibrand. She, of course, says, "Congratulations on an impressive race and making history." And he says, "History," in scare quotes, "that you tried to prevent from happening." And then tagging Cynthia Nixon. "Cynthia Nixon can make similar history in September. It's not too late for you to rescind your endorsement of her corruption-tainted, corporate-funded, dynastic prince incumbent opponent who makes Joe Crowley look populist." And it's like, the incumbent senator from New York just said something nice about the outcome of the race, and surely she probably did have a preference for Crowley. Although I don't know, maybe she endorsed Ocasio. It's entirely possible, and that's one of those instances where it's like, you know what? Let's pull out the old, if you have nothing nice to say, just say nothing. Like, what is it? Does it really? I mean, I'm not saying I'm calling for civility or tone police or anything. I'm just saying, if down in Brazil you can't think of anything in particular to say about the New York 14 Democratic congressional primary, I think you could be forgiven. And if you can think of something to say and it's just not productive, you can be forgiven for not saying it. You can be forgiven for saying something counterproductive too. It happens all the time. Plenty of people do it. It seems like one of those situations where, if you get somebody to make a conciliatory gesture and your idea of standing on principle is saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to piss in your eye, then, maybe that's why you're not changing things by yourself and you find it's easier to have a, nice life living in Brazil rather than the United States. And I'm not saying it's not better there, except I don't think it is. It's certainly not for me anyway. I just find that a little bizarre, but par for the course. Anyway, it just strikes me as maybe not necessarily the tone you need at this point, but like I said, I don't need to we can all simply watch it and disapprove it. We don't have to say you're not allowed to say it. I don't know. Observation I wanted to make. Okay. Let's see, other things that I have put aside for further discussion include, well, for one thing, the news reported yesterday that Reality Winner, the accused National Security Agency leaker Reality Winner, pleads guilty, just by way of updating the case so you know what's happening and what's going on that front. I'm sorry, I can't tell you because my Flash player is out of date. Is that really the most important thing here? I don't see why updating my Flash player would be necessary to read this article in The Hill, of all places. All of a sudden is now, I'm going to try it again and see if they try to pull this one on me again. And it may be, there's no Flash in this thing. What they're trying to tell me is, you need to update your Flash player so that we can play ads to you that you don't want to see. Really? Well, what if I just don't do it? Anyway, back to the news. Reality Winner, the former government contractor charged with leaking classified information, pleaded guilty in federal court Tuesday, and I could see why that would happen. A, she got a plea deal, and B, I guess she is guilty of that. It's a question of whether or not that's something that you should be imprisoned for, or whether on balance it's better that you not go. Not like on balance something that's better will actually happen under the Trump administration, but in the abstract. So she's pled guilty in federal court Tuesday as part of a plea agreement reached with federal prosecutors. She is a 26-year-old former contractor for NSA, of course, arrested in June of last year after allegedly mailing a classified report on Russian interference in the federal election, because that was a thing then, to the news outlet The Intercept, which later published the document. And, she said in court, all of my actions I did willfully, meaning I did so of my own free will, which is, part of the bargain when you go in to do these plea deals, but it also happens to be true, and that's probably why she had no problem saying it, despite the fact that she was going to be sentenced to prison. Did we talk about the prison sentence? Yes, here we are. Court documents filed Thursday indicated that Winner had entered into a plea agreement, though the details of the deal were not known at the time. The agreement calls for a sentence of 63 months, just over 5 years, thanks for doing the math, in federal prison in exchange for Winner's plea, according to the Times. However, she will be sentenced at a later date, and so 63 might not be the final number, or there may be some caveats to it. The Intercept published a story way back when, drawing on details of the leaked document, published their story last June. Well, stands to reason that's when she released the document to them, describing Russian government efforts to breach state election systems. Winner's arrest became publicly known days after the article was published. Winner, the former linguist for the U.S. Air Force, has been in jail since her arrest. And that's sort of a somewhat fascinating part of the backstory to that. Of course, being that the Intercept, home to or affiliated with a number of those members of the Democratic-leaning left in the journalism community who, or I guess it was the home for the largest number anyway. Not everybody there felt this way. The home for the largest number of left-leaning journalists who disbelieved the Russia Gate, the Trump-Russia connection conspiracy theories, such as they were, or, things that we think of as pretty much fact-based at this point. And they resisted the idea for the longest time. And then they got a hold of leaked documents from Reality Winner, and all of a sudden The Intercept became home to left-leaning journalists who were desperate to publish the real backstory to the Trump-Russia collusion, or at least the Russian interference angle on the story. And that was kind of an interesting development to watch all by itself. And then, of course, also interesting to watch because The Intercept also very often plays host to opinionating on the willingness of journalists occasionally to comply with government demands, or sometimes it's less about the journalists than the editorial staff or legal staff at their papers, but willing to comply with or finding themselves subject to and forcibly complying with government demands that their sources be given up, and of course objecting strongly to that outcome, only to find out that, lo and behold, their secret source suddenly somehow got found out and arrested a few days after, and golly, maybe it's not that safe a thing to do to talk to anybody. And The Intercept, despite its high principles, unable to avoid the same fate, I guess. I'm sure I'm mangling the story in some sense. I just find it interesting that, I don't feel like it needs to be used to undermine what's going on at The Intercept. I think they do make some valuable contributions to the journalism here, certainly more contributions than I do. At least we can be fair about that. But I guess it's sometimes there are some people for whom I think it's occasionally still worth pointing out that, hey, nobody's perfect, and that includes you, and we see that you sometimes find yourselves unwittingly, perhaps, in the same position as others for whom, with whom, or in whose cases you very quickly follow up with charges that the only reason this happened, the only reason this source got themselves found out and in trouble is your horrible corruption, as opposed to, hey, sometimes these things do happen, and we try and avoid them, but nobody's perfect is all I can say. Let's see. One or two other things we can do quick hits on. And let's see, some longer form stuff too, depending on how the rest of the show rolls out. I thought this was an interesting tweet and discussion. Not normally some sort of thing I would stop on in the middle of a flood of so much other information. But Stephen Wolfe, who writes, of course, for the Daily Kos elections staff, tweeting / as they might say, clapping back at, but I don't think we're going to apply that term, just sort of replying to Megan McArdle, whose name you've heard before, columnist for the Washington Post, of course, and tweeting out this, I don't know who she's responding to, but I guess it comes in the wake of the discussion of one of the disappointing and bordering on infuriating, and I think on the other side of the border of infuriating, Supreme Court decisions yesterday. And yeah, we'll have to find out whether Armando has availability sometime this week to parse those things. But in this case, the gerrymandering decision, and Megan McArdle tweeting thus, guys, I'm going to say this now in caps one more time. And yes, this will be on your civics exam. And that's really just setting yourself up at this point. Gerrymandering, and she's doing this with a period after each word, gerrymandering doesn't affect the electoral college. So you cannot win a presidential election through gerrymandering. You people are so annoyingly stupid, I can't take it anymore. Wow. Well, as it happens, Stephen Wolf was watching and comments in a, I think, appropriately condescending answer. This is some galaxy brain level nonsense that ignores how Republican politicians admitted 2 Dakotas, the states, Montana, etc., as states. They are states in their own right, despite their lack of population. And remember that each of those admitted states has 2 senators, just like the most populous state in the Union, California, just like the other 40-something states that have larger population than those. The 2 Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, of course. But she's talking, he's isolated those 3 in particular. But this ignores how Republican politicians admitted the 2 Dakotas, Montana, etc., as states with 2 votes in the Senate to benefit their party after the Civil War. And admittedly, if there was any time I really wanted to benefit the Republican Party, it would have been after the Civil War. But it's a good point. Republican politicians have tried to gerrymander the Electoral College in recent years, too. Don't forget that there are several examples, and guess what? Stephen has written on the subject and is readily available to discuss it with you on Daily Kos, and links us to one of his efforts to do so from back in late January of 2017. Anybody have any idea what might have been going on or was hot topic in the news late January 2017? But there was lots of news then, and that wasn't exactly what Stephen Wolf was focusing on. He was focusing on how Republicans were moving forward with plans to, you'll never guess, gerrymander the Electoral College in 3 states. And this is a smaller bore thought, I guess, than the idea of admitting entire states and doing so in order to stack the deck 2 votes at a time in the Senate. But remember also that admitting a state to the Union not only puts 2 senators in the Senate, but it also, well, for one thing, it puts 1 congressman, usually for these small population states, even if they're vast expanses of territory, 1 representative in Congress, and that 1 representative in Congress is important to this discussion only insofar as he, too, represents a vote where? Not just in the House of Representatives, but in the Electoral College. Admit a state with hardly any occupants, and the result, no matter how small the population, is a minimum of 3 electoral votes. The 2 Dakotas, Montana, some of these other very, very sparsely populated states, and hey, it begins to add up. I mean, as between those 3 states named, it's not a huge chunk, but it is 9 electoral votes. And electoral votes are never anything to sneeze at. And that's not even what Stephen's talking about. We might as well read a little bit about this story from way back when. Donald Trump just won the presidency due to the Electoral College, despite losing the popular vote. That's just a fact, right? But Republican legislators in key states are plotting to make our electoral system even less democratic. Of course, they would argue, and it's not a bad argument really on its surface, on its face. That's what makes it so dangerous. They argue that they're making it more democratic. What's the argument? Republicans in Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Virginia have all proposed allocating 1 electoral vote to the winner of each congressional district, and then 2 to the statewide winner, something that only Maine and Nebraska currently do. While this change might sound like a more proportional reform, Republicans have only one purpose in mind: gerrymandering the Electoral College. And remember, that's impossible. Meghan McArdle. That's what she's writing for the Washington Post. Meghan McArdle. That's exactly what she said. Is totally impossible. How could they possibly be doing it? Well, how this works is simple. Stephen wrote all that time ago. Congressional maps with 55% of districts were drawn to favor Republicans, and just 10% of them were drawn to favor Democrats. Consequently, Trump carried a majority of 230 districts, and Hillary Clinton just 205. Thus, Trump still would have prevailed despite losing the popular vote if every state awarded votes by district, by the way, as would Mitt Romney in 2012 and George W. Bush in 2000. Under this system, Trump still likely would have won even without gerrymandering because he carried 10 more states than Clinton did. But then, ultimately it comes down to this. The popular vote was what it was. Hillary Clinton won it overwhelmingly. It is, however, the Electoral College that delivered the office to Donald Trump. And how does it do that? By slicing and dicing the total number of votes in just such a way that he can actually pull off what purports to be a victory. And honestly, if you can't figure that out, you ought not to be writing in the political realm at all. And I think duly chastised Meghan McArdle, but I don't know. It didn't have to be that way, but as long as we're tone policing, maybe that wasn't the way for you to approach this particular task with the caps and the periods after each sentence. So sorry, you happen to have lost that one in the People's Court of Political Science, I guess. I just thought that was really interesting and wanted to spend a little bit of time on it. Let's see, other things that we ought to touch on. We'll have to scroll through the pocket for just a little bit. And, let's see. Oh, this was kind of an interesting thing. I thought this was an interesting observation. This was probably one I should have made for Greg. Maybe we can return to it tomorrow. Benji Sarlin's tweet from yesterday, and I guess also on the subject of the gerrymandering topic and decision from the Supreme Court. He says, judicial outcomes at all. There was a lot of discussion, of course, of yesterday of the stolen Supreme Court seat, and we'll probably get back to that with Joan. And hey, any single one of you would want to do that. Oh, and here she is now. Let's, maybe we'll hold on for this and hold it for discussion and add it into the mix and see what she has to say. Hey, Joan, how are you doing today?
I am here.
Okay, that is a fair answer. Yeah, it's reflexive. Oh, I'm doing great. Wait a minute. Donald Trump is president and everything is horrible. I could say physically I'm doing great. Hey, I have some aches and pains here and I have a constant headache. Okay, I'm here. That's a good point.
A twitching eye.
Is that the way it manifests for you?
Yeah, my left eye's been twitching for 3 days.
Wow, okay. Well, I can't
count today. It's only morning, but
all right. I don't know. It's part of a new day. Why not exaggerate? What do you're not trying to be civil, are you? I mean, it's been 400 days. And they
no
owe
civility
you money.
here.
Yeah, right.
I refuse.
Exactly. That's so that's it. Those are the big stories of the day. I was just taking a look at a couple of things. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to a few minutes beforehand, but I appreciate it. It was a good time to appreciate Stephen Wolfe and his writing for Daily Kos Selections and going back into his archives as he was pushing back on Meghan McArdle and her insistence that, no,
not
you dummies.
What gerrymander means.
Yeah, not quite getting the hang of that. And it's just one of those, I guess you could chalk it up even to institutional bias in the sense of the Electoral College is right there in the Constitution, so it is fantastic because everything that was originally put in the Constitution is fantastic. Oh, really? What about... Oh, okay, I know you're going to the 3/5 thing. That one's bad. All right, the Electoral College might also suck, That could be...
It might. It just might.
Doesn't seem to be doing us any favors at this point, but at least the Electoral College was civil and cast their votes something. Not like we were going to actually convince people who end up being electors to vote their conscience. We've long since done away with the conscience of the Electoral College. And, originally that might not have been a bad gamble, but now we put dopes on the college. At least, it's up to each.
Well, why not? We elect him to the White House.
Yeah, right. I mean, who did you think he was going to nominate for these jobs? Right. I mean, the people who are actually occupying federal government jobs long term and getting paid for it are horrible, horrible people, grifters, criminals, and various other scum of the earth. It's not like he was, doing any better for the Electoral College. He probably didn't even realize he had to name any names until the very last minute.
Oh, I'm sure he didn't.
So, who knows what they may have put together for that. And it was probably Paul Manafort that managed a lot of that, too.
Yeah.
I have no idea. And if it wasn't, it was, you could pick it. George or Corey Lewandowski, Steve Bannon, you choose.
Jeff Sessions.
Right. Who was the Electoral College management team for them, I wonder? Should probably find that out one day, and you'll be appalled, I promise you.
That's not a rabbit hole I'm going to go down. I have enough appalling.
Yeah.
But it actually leads to sort of an interesting conversation we could have about process.
Okay. Let's
process actually mattering.
I feel
it matters in the Electoral College. It matters in how we pick presidents.
Yes.
It matters in how legislation is passed.
Yes.
It matters in what legislation is not passed. You and Greg were talking about the discharge petition on immigration before.
Yes.
And whether or not Republicans were actually duped into not signing the discharge petition.
I do have that question.
Perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps. But those same Republicans who were duped into not signing it may or may not have understood what they were doing when they passed the rule to consider the Good Lab bill, the bill that everybody knew was going to fail, the hardcore white supremacist wish list of Donald Trump. They knew it wasn't going to pass, but by voting for the rule to bring it to the floor to defeat it, they defeated the discharge petition.
Yes, okay.
And whether or not they really understood that that was what they were doing, that's what GOP moderate senators, Republican so-called moderate House members did.
Yes, and they may just have been, part of the deal may have been, well, do this, and then when people say, oh, but very few people will figure it out, but when people do, and they say, oh, but you just defeated your own discharge petition.
Yeah.
What? Just say that.
And in defeating the discharge petition, pretty much took it off the table for the rest of the year.
Oh, well, that's bad. I wouldn't see what
because there isn't time to do it.
Okay.
It has to be brought up like on a Monday or a Thursday, and a certain Monday or a Thursday of the month, and we only have one of those available.
I gotcha.
Between now and November.
Yes, it's not just, I've forgotten that part. It's not just, okay, we got 218, so everything has to drop, and now that should be the rule, but
it should.
It isn't, and I'm sure
it's
because they considered it too dangerous at the time that just a mob could take over. Imagine the majority of the House of Representatives getting together to decide what they wanted to consider next. You can't have that. It'd be chaos. So, yeah, that's true. Very frequently. They have some very, very weird calendar rules both in the Senate and in the House. And a successful discharge petition is considered on the next blah, 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 something, first and third Mondays of the month. And all you have to do is declare those to be recess days. Of course, you need a majority to agree to declare a recess. But, they're never going to pass up a vacation day, as people like to call it, even if it isn't. But...
well,
yeah, that's a way to engineer the death of it. Yeah, right.
So, whether they were duped, whether they just come into the jobs completely ignorant and don't know how process works, which I think is extremely likely.
Yes. That is
at any rate, they shot themselves in the foot.
Okay. Well, a lot of Republicans do that.
Yes.
It's
weird.
They're
quite adept.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, we're about to shoot ourselves in the foot for 2 minutes in a row, as we once again enter a fascinating conversation right about at break time. But that's okay. It'll give us a chance to organize our thoughts and figure out how to carry forward for a scintillating half hour one more time. These things are a stream of consciousness, and at the very least, you get a good view of what's going on inside our heads, even if it's usually, arg, help. That's worth something, too. All right, hang on. We'll be right back with Joan McCarter after this 2-minute break and round up all the news you need to know that we can squeeze in to the next 30 minutes. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That means our break is over. Joan Carter, thankfully, is still with us. We didn't drive her away with our disorganization and scattered thoughts. But, okay, well, we're going to get back on some kind of track here and discuss what's upcoming. Let's see. We left off with
It's very, very difficult to be on any track these days, Kagro.
That's true, and it's, I guess, part of the strategy to make it impossible to focus on any one thing for any amount of time. But the good news is anywhere you turn, something relevant is happening, even if it's terrible. So, spin the wheel.
That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say. We're basically saying, okay, all right, whatever direction you want to carry us in here, we're willing to go. This is one of the reasons we have you here is you can always find something of import to say.
I try.
Yeah. Well, if, like I said, we spin the wheel and go in any direction, or what you've been working on this morning.
Before the break, we were talking immigration. We can pick that back up again.
Right.
Because the so-called moderate bill that Stephen Miller and the Freedom Caucus negotiated with the so-called moderates, and guess how that turned out, is coming to a vote today. Nobody expects it to pass, but they said they were going to have the vote, so they're going to have the vote. They finally got the tweet, kind of, that they wanted from Donald Trump, saying he says everybody should vote for this bill. He, in fact, screamed it at them in all caps.
Really? I missed
saying
it.
They should pass the strong but fair immigration bill, even though the Dems won't let it pass in the Senate.
Okay.
Which means it's kind of not really what the tweet that they wanted. It kind of harkens back to his last one when they said that they shouldn't even bother with voting because
he could end up back there in 10 seconds. But all right. I mean, I guess that's why they didn't really want to do any of this stuff by Twitter, but they have what they have.
They have what they have. They have Donald
all caps
screaming at them.
Well, that is something. And I know
it harkens back to one of his favorite themes.
Yeah.
It's the Democrats' fault, and it's the Senate Democrats' fault, and it's the filibuster.
Oh, okay.
Never mind that you can't get 218 House Republicans to agree on anything.
Yeah.
It's all the Senate Democrats' fault because of the filibuster.
Well, that's the one thing he can blame and sound like he knows something, if not entirely what he's talking about. He talks about an obscure rule. That means he's on top of things.
Right. Kind of.
Okay, yeah.
So we've had another foray into getting rid of the filibuster. Last night, Trump met with, I think it was 15 House and Senate appropriators and said again, and leadership said again, you got to get rid of the filibuster, McConnell, because Schumer's going to do it as soon as he's majority leader. Because I heard from a mutual friend of ours that Chuck said he's going to do it. So you got to do it before he does it.
Okay.
And McConnell, again, had to come out this morning and say, yeah, no, we don't have the votes to do that. So never mind.
Well, okay. I mean, maybe we will do it. I don't think so, but you never know.
No, maybe Schumer will do it. I don't think so.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a Chuck kind of thing to do.
It really doesn't. Although sometimes I do wonder, like, well, why wouldn't McConnell just say, yeah, sure, to hell with it? But I guess it has to be something he personally cares about doing something about, and I don't really know what that would be.
I don't either. And things are going fine for McConnell in the Senate right now.
Yes.
As they're going the way McConnell wants them to go.
Yeah. That's if you can undo that, you might be able to motivate him.
Yeah.
But, well, I think only we can undo that.
I think only we can undo that.
And then at which point his motivation to get rid of the filibuster will change and also be irrelevant.
Right. And he'll come up with all sorts of new rules that Democrats insisted upon at some point in the past to say, you can't do this because blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Because he's McConnell.
Could be anything. I did see that I guess he got a little taste of the protest thing the other day, too.
He did.
Very weird.
He and his wife, Elaine Chao, who is Secretary of Transportation?
Yes.
Transportation.
The tougher.
Were leaving a function in Georgetown yesterday.
Okay.
And were confronted by immigration activists.
Yeah. So they got their turn. I only saw the briefest of video clips. Elaine Chao, by far the tougher of the two, got out and got in the protesters' faces as Mitch McConnell jumped into the car and left her out there. So
leave my husband alone.
Yeah. I don't know. I hesitate to say, hey, wow, I actually admire that about Elaine Chao. I maybe sort of a little bit
that
do,
part
but
you can admire the part where they are playing for them the recording that McClatchy got last week of little children sobbing and screaming for their mothers.
Okay.
That's what they were playing for McConnell and Chao as they left this function.
So
and with that playing in the background, Elaine actually told the protesters, leave my husband alone.
Yeah, he's the victim in all this.
Yeah.
Well, okay. That was very interesting to watch, and was interesting to watch her try. That's the most I've ever heard out of Elaine Chao. I don't think I have ever really heard her. She speaks. I know she does, but it's not a featured item in the news usually. So it was interesting.
Not
in
usually,
many respects. No. And but a good idea, generally speaking. I like the idea of it shouldn't necessarily just be the cabinet as the target, as, say, Maxine Waters suggested, although I think that's a fine suggestion. But you get a twofer here, and certainly Mitch McConnell is as responsible as anybody for anything that happens in the Trump administration that he doesn't put the brakes on.
Absolutely.
And, so
for the Trump administration itself.
Yeah. They're the two. That's a fine target, I think, even if Elaine Chao wants to stand out there and fight about it. And maybe that just makes it better. Good. Got someone to talk to.
Yeah, I think engaging makes sense.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Right. And nobody got hurt.
When
thankfully.
they engage, we see who they really are.
Yes. You get a good glimpse of that. I will also sort of note in the background that I guess there's I don't know if anybody's really listening to it, but right-wing opinion columnists / weirdos / activists are now enjoying taking to Twitter and urging those who they think might become the targets of protest to arm themselves because they might hear this audio played as they leave a party. And so I guess the implication is you should shoot people who play this audio for you. I don't know why that would be a measured or appropriate response, but you know how it is with Gimmitarians. We're uncivil for saying, I think you should leave this restaurant. And it's their Second Amendment right to kill you for whispering that.
Yes.
So we're in a good place.
We're civility, folks, civility.
Right.
Boy, Democrats really shouldn't be allowing this to happen on their watch. Really. No. It's going to be very counterproductive for activists to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be stealing babies.
Right. You got to feel bad about that.
Yeah.
I mean, about saying you shouldn't steal them.
You've got to feel very bad about pointing out how uncivil it is to be stealing babies from mother's arms.
Yeah. I mean, think about
horrifying.
How bad that is for the people who have to hear it. They may never recover. The trauma of being told that people should not be stealing babies, it could last forever, psychiatrists say, and you don't want to do that to people.
No.
I don't know what happens to the kids, but whatever. They're kids.
They're resilient, though.
Yeah. Those little
guys. Some nice white evangelical couple will adopt them and
that's true. Thoughts and prayers.
Tours.
Right. Thoughts and prayers for those kids. A little heavier on the prayers, less so on the thoughts. But that's our prescription for them. We'll fix these kids yet. We'll turn them into white evangelicals. So, okay.
You have to think that's part of the plan.
Yeah, historically it's been our plan. We've done this.
It's kind of been the process. Yeah.
We've forgotten about it, and it's been a long time since we were able to, kidnap entire populations this way and reprogram them. But it's not like it hasn't been done, and it's not fun to think about. But you can think about civil ways of discussing the actual history of having done this to entire populations, if you want.
Because we must be civil above all else.
Yeah. Well, that's all a very disturbing sort of thing. And I don't know, I guess it has eaten up a little energy. It's been an interesting diversion, and as a tactic, it's sort of kind of worked, as I realized this morning. And I asked Greg, and I guess maybe you have an idea too. Do we still literally not have any actual reporting on where the girls are being kept?
We've seen a few of the pictures that they've released, the DHS has released, that have girls in them.
Yeah. And then at one point they were accused of having released old pictures of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case.
Yeah, I don't think we really do still know where the girls are.
Okay. I mean, that's just like astounding. It was astounding when we realized that we didn't know the first time, and it's even more astounding that we've not said that even louder in the subsequent days. I mean, each minute we don't find out that each minute that there's no access being given out, whether to the press or members of Congress or the Red Cross, should be an increasing outrage. But we have to do the red hen thing and the poop throwing just to keep up. And
I saw the poop throwing.
We missed our chance. Yeah,
but that's civil. Because it's conservative poop.
Yes, so that's also a huge point that absolutely needs to be addressed. We can't just push by the fact that it's been the habit of everyone, the establishment and of all sorts, press, electeds, etc., to insist that Republican outrage, when it's acted out in public, is somehow genuine, grassroots, patriotic, whatever. Honk if you hate taxes. They covered every single one of those things, whatever. But Democrats dare show up someplace, and oh my goodness, how could you possibly? So that's an important thing.
How could you confront power in that way?
Yeah. Oh well. Even though we have a long tradition of that too, it's sort of what we do and what the country was about, but. Okay. I feel chastened. Well, it's disconcerting.
You kind of would have thought maybe we had gotten past this particular debate when we were lied into a disastrous war.
That could have been it.
Then maybe some folks would have sort of opened their eyes and said, maybe it's okay to yell at them for certain things.
Yeah. Or, there's so many examples, of course. And then when we did, do the thing that you're supposed to organize a big protest / march, keep it peaceful, get permits, etc. We all know the story of gathering 100,000 plus protesters in Washington, D.C. and getting whatever. And then, Glenn Beck is going to do something in D.C. That's serious.
Yeah.
Let's cover that. And, various things that people have pointed to and, said, well, what about the civility of this? What about the civility of Donald Trump, making fun of what was the name? I can't even recall the name
the
of our
disabled reporter.
Yes, right. And
yeah.
I think I only remember his first name being Serge, but that's about it now. But because it's buried under a pile of everything else. All right. Well, how are you? How is your outrage manifesting itself in your writing? And I guess I could ask by way of
paralysis.
Segue. Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's what I'm fighting right now. Is just the overwhelming news dump.
Yeah.
It's hard to respond sometimes.
Yes. Right. We find that in our radio show every once in a while. There are moments in an article where I say, I can't decide which comment to make. Hold on. How shall I? All right. There are 3 things. By the time I get finished with the first one, I'll have forgotten the other 2 because it might take me half an hour. But there are 3 things wrong with this sentence. Oh, my God. Yeah.
And I find myself screaming at both Paul Ryan and Marco Rubio on Twitter a lot.
Okay. Yes.
Which is not particularly productive because, they're not going to see it. But it makes me feel a little bit better to yell at Paul Ryan on Twitter.
Okay. I can feel that. I agree with that. It's kind of all you can do. And it's a nice signal to everybody else. Everyone who happens to see your tweets and the people who they get passed on to. And this sort of came up this morning, too. So many editorials insisting that, with the civility issue, and you ought to, it's not accomplishing anything to express your outrage. Although I have a feeling that it does accomplish something in some small way. Other people say, I thought everyone behaved the way the New York Times and Washington Post said they should. But now I see for myself that there are others who feel the same thing as I do. That's the power of the social media thing. Last year or 2, I guess a couple of years ago, well, we might have a revolution throughout the Middle East because of social media. And now, here in America, no, please be quiet. Don't say anything. Don't use the media for anything.
Because it's rude.
Right. Revolution around the world, you be quiet. That's odd.
Yeah, that's us because I don't know why. Because
shining city on a hill.
Shining city on a hill. We're above all of that.
Yeah.
Although, maybe not for long.
Okay.
Trump apparently is thinking that maybe we should leave NATO.
Yes.
And be like, I can't remember what country it was that said it's not a member of NATO, but it consults with NATO. And I don't remember. Sweden. Scandinavian.
Yeah.
Trump
Nobel
said,
Peace Prize
hey, that's a
people.
good idea. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know why he was talking to Sweden about NATO in particular. One gets the sense that he got the chance to talk to the Swedish government and said, pay up. Why?
Probably.
For NATO.
Yes.
Oh, we're not in NATO. Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be either. Well, maybe, then you'd have a lot less complaining to do.
Yeah.
But
NATO would probably at this point just as soon kick him out.
I wonder.
If they could kick out Trump but keep the United States. I think this is probably what everybody would like to do right about now.
Right.
As he's throwing Starburst candies at people.
Yes. And pretty soon, why can't we make these starbursts nuclear? I want to be able to throw nuclear starbursts at people. Well, there is a parallel there in Canada. We let the fervor for this die, but maybe we can fan the sanctioned Trump flames again there, where, at least in the area of trade. It's not quite so easy to do in the military, but in trade, and saying if we're going to be imposing retaliatory sanctions, why should we? I mean, we say aloud, we know this isn't the United States, and we're sorry about this happening to hardworking people in the United States, but your president is nuts. Yes, he acts like a whacked-out Russian oligarch, which is maybe what you should treat him as, and sanction him personally. I mean, he's practically invited you to do so by refusing to divest from his international business interests, so go ahead.
Yeah,
take aim.
Target them specifically.
Yeah, that's why the emoluments clause was supposed to protect the president too, but he refuses to use it because he wants to use it to hurt the rest of us. Fine, then we'll use it to, we'll allow others to use it to hurt you. There's nothing we can do about what other countries do. But if you find that there are Americans advocating, yes, punch our president in the wallet, well, then maybe that's an issue. We'll have to settle for ourselves.
I'd punch him in the wallet.
Yeah, I mean,
Actually, I would not want to get that close to him. But
and I don't know where he keeps his wallet either. That's good. Bad idea. All right. Don't think about
that. Just looking at the front page of Daily Kos and thinking about the other things we could talk about. We could talk about the good things.
All right. Have you got one?
We've got the upset last night. Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, that is exciting.
That's pretty darned exciting.
I think so.
And I will say for Joe Crowley, he has been tremendously gracious in defeat.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
It makes you feel good about primaries again.
Yeah, primaries. Hey, what about them?
Yeah, I've always felt uncomfortable.
This one came out of nowhere. I haven't spent a lot of time paying attention to Alexandria, but I think that the fact that she did this says an awful lot for her.
Yeah, and it seems like it seemed like the right district to do this in. And I, too, had not paid that much attention, mostly because, we'll let them settle this. Thank you very much. And but I watched the growing excitement for her and said, well, this seems like the place to be doing it. It feels like a little bit of a Chapo Trap House district, right? Why shouldn't they do this? Let's see them go for it. Can they turn out the numbers? Everyone had questions about whether or not they could. And then they showed that if you organize right for that district, you can. And that district being overwhelmingly Democratic, guess what that means? It means you'll win a seat in Congress. So, yeah, absolutely take this opportunity to try this out. It's no skin off her nose if she loses, right? Go for it. Perfect age, perfect time, perfect candidate for the perfect district to do something like this. And I'm glad it worked out for them in the sense that, without saying, oh, I've been such a huge follower of hers or something. I'm not. I'm just saying I'm happy that it demonstrates for people who might have been their first campaign to get involved with in an organized way, or it may have been their 20th. But a win is a win, and you get to say, see, hard work, organization, preparation ahead of time. Even with New York and its crazy registration rules, it means that if you have your act together and you follow, you understand the procedure, even if you follow it in a different way, and you can only do that if you, like you said, study the procedure, get to know it, and use its rules for your purposes, you can win. And so that will mean other people will think, oh, I can. And it won't work everywhere. But if it can't work there, it can't work anywhere. So thankfully it did work there.
Well, it worked in Washington State.
Yes, true.
In 2017, or 2016, I should say, when Jim McDermott retired, and I have a hard time with her name. Premilla
Jayapal?
Jayapal?
Yeah, if people would interview her on television more often, we would be
We'd
better
know.
at that.
But you've also seen she's a freshman, but she has made a huge impact because she's been out front on child separation, on family separation.
Yes.
And is making a big difference in terms of people seeing what's happening. She and Jeff Merkley. Thank you, Pacific Northwest representatives.
Yeah. That's another good place to do these things.
So there's precedent, and I think that it could be just a little slice of what we're going to be seeing in November. I hope.
I hope so.
Because there are more women of color running for races from city councils all the way up to Congress.
Yeah.
And this could be a wave.
It could, and that kind of experience at the lower levels of government, as you know, a lot of people actually place a significant value on that, and a lot of districts where it isn't necessarily the sort of place that being an upstart from out of nowhere is the winning combination. Like, for instance, as I was discussing with Greg, here in the Virginia suburbs, in Virginia 10th, there was no shortage of opponents for Barbara Comstock, but here in these Virginia, D.C. suburbs, people still place, significant value on governmental experience within the system you seek to change. And so although we had very outspoken opposition leaders and people who did have experience in government, that is, that they worked in the Obama administration and then found themselves on the front lines of resistance protests, which would ordinarily make you a very popular person. In a lot of places, there was also the siren call of, well, we do have somebody who, a woman elected leader who has a actual record of legislative accomplishments and electoral victories right here locally. And, although a lot of people were upset sort of upset that, oh, well, she's the establishment choice to take on Barbara Comstock. Well, in this district, that's what you needed.
Yeah.
And you got it, and now you have her leading the race by 10 points. And I don't know.
By 10 points. Yeah. You're going to have a new member of Congress.
I sure hope so. It's very early, of course, but...
it's very early, but...
Sebastian Gorka has weighed in, and he doesn't like Barbara Comstock, so she's finished. His heavily accented, I cannot support Barbara Comstock.
Does that make any difference at all in your district?
I cannot think that it does.
Is there anybody in your district that's going to be listening to Gorka?
The Hungarian-American Business Council? I don't know. I don't think we have one. No, I hope not. But I guess he lives here. So I'm moving. No, I can stay here and defeat him. I'm sorry. That's the path. So I don't know. It's a very interesting trend. I'm sorry I didn't pay more attention to what was happening in that district, only because I feel like I'm behind the story. But congratulations to the people who took care of business right there at home.
Well, and taking care of business at home, I think, is part of the story. I mean, didn't Crowley send a surrogate to a debate?
Yeah, I think there was. Greg mentioned that he didn't show up at one of them, but one of them he did. I don't know. So part credit, I guess. There was certainly a lot of reporting on from Ocasio supporting outlets that he was less than stellar in his race and perhaps in constituent service and all sorts of reasons to drum up support for Ocasio, and fine, terrific. She sounds like she'll do well there, and like I said, they put us in no danger of losing the seat, so that's fine. That's where you're supposed to do this stuff.
Absolutely.
So, again, congratulations to them. We're back on our heels with so many other things. It was important to be able to bring up the big positive of the morning. So thanks for saving the show.
And we'll leave all of the bad Supreme Court news to Armando to do tomorrow or Friday.
Good, yes, and he's boycotting. Don't sweeten my mood with good news. I'm on a roll. So We'll call on him later in the week. Thank you very much, Joan, and thanks for finding an up note to end on. I appreciate it.
You are most welcome. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, very good. See you then. And for now, we'll have more to bring you, all the stories that we skipped and favored the good news at the end when Justice Putnam brings you his program. Thanks again to Joan. And, let's go see what's on tap, because you know there's a lot of things that we haven't been able to touch on just yet, and you know that I'm so far into the music, I'm not going to be able to cover them all. Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, the D.C. Press Corps really doesn't like it when liberals upset the social order and established customs of the high life by not showing proper civility to their betters. We did cover that, but there's always room for more. And then, with fresh revelations and shifting answers, Federal Election Commission complaints about the NRA's Russia ties keep piling up. The Supreme Court rules abortion providers who are forced to have a broom closet every 12 feet and an ER room fully staffed have less First Amendment rights than abortion opponents who want to lie about science and medicine without a license.
You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How do you like me battling my own outro to bring you yet more news? And the senior DOJ official responsible for training immigration judges says 3- and 4-year-olds can represent themselves in court. Wow, it's really getting crazier and crazier. There's more, of course, but you'll have to stay tuned and listen to Justice Explain It All next.